Welcome to the Sales Influence Podcast, where we talk about finding the why in how people buy. I'm your host, Victor Antonio, and today I want to talk about you gotta know your numbers. Yes, you gotta know your numbers. Okay, if you want to be very formal about this, you have to know your numbers. I like saying you gotta know your numbers. It sounds cooler. But what do I mean by you gotta know your numbers? Now, some of you listening to me have watched my show on Spike TV. My show on Spike TV is called Life or Debt. DEBT, like people who are going into debt. And the show's all about me working with the family for a whole week, basically walking them through their finances, figuring out what they're doing wrong and mentally shifting them. And then what happens is I come back in 90 days to see how they're doing. And if you watch my show, by the way, you can watch it on or view it on Hulu, and you can also find it on Amazon. Life or Debt, Victor Antonio. Now, in that series, in that show, we've recorded 11 episodes, by the way. In season 1, 11 episodes. And in the show, one of the things you constantly hear me saying is, you gotta know your numbers. You gotta know your numbers. If you don't know your numbers, it's like a GPS system. If you don't know where you're at, you don't know where you're going, then you're not gonna get there. You gotta know your numbers. You need to know where you're at. Now, when it comes to selling, moving away from personal finance, when it comes to selling, you have to know your numbers. You simply need to know, or at least keep track of, what you're doing right and what you're doing wrong. For example, if I were to ask you as a salesperson, how many calls are you making to new prospects, right? To prospects or new prospects. Now, I'll divide those two carefully. By prospects, I mean you're just reaching out to your target market. That's B2C. But if you're B2B, maybe you're trying to reach out to a new market segment that also buys your product. So in other words, how many calls are you making per week to get to your new prospects? Do you know your number? So imagine me walking into your office. On the TV show, I walked into people's houses. Imagine me walking into your office and I say to you, hey, tell me, what are your numbers? And the first question I'm going to ask you is, one, talk to me about the number of calls you're making every week to generate sales and fill that pipeline. Could you answer that question? And I'm going to ask you also, what time of day are you calling? Who are you calling? What's the target profile that you're calling? I need you to know that. But more importantly, how many calls are you making? Okay? This is what I talk to people on the show. It's like, how much money are you spending? That helps me understand what type of volume you're generating. I'm going to also ask you this second number. Based on the number of calls you make, how many appointments are you getting? So that's called the call to appointment ratio. How many calls to appointment? What's your call to appointment ratio? How many appointments are you getting? And if you can't answer that question, then you need to keep track of your numbers. The next one I'm going to ask you is, if you got the meetings, how many times were the decision makers in the room? On a scale of 1 to 10 or 1 out of 10 times, how often are all the decision makers in the room? I'm going to ask you that also. And in your presentation that you do, how many lead to either a closed sale or you advance the sale? Now, let me clarify those two. To close a sale is to get the deal right there, sign the contract. But sometimes in a longer sales cycle, like in a B2B sales cycle, you just can't close the deal on one call because multiple decision makers are involved, sometimes 5 to 7. So sometimes you have to advance the sale. Advance the sale means you take it to the next step, whatever that next step may be in your sales process. Now, again, I can also ask you, what's your sales cycle? How long does it typically take to close a deal? Could you answer that question? So let's go through these again. These are the numbers you need to know. If I woke you out of a dead sleep and I asked you these numbers, would you know them? How many calls are you making every week? Do you know the number? How many appointments are you getting based on the number of calls you're making? Now, by the way, this is important. Let me pause here for a second. The number of appointments you're getting is interesting to analyze, because if you're not getting a lot of appointments, but you're getting the decision maker on the phone, what may be happening is that something in your script isn't right. Now, yes, I said script. Whether you're B2C or B2B, you have to have a script. And again, if you don't like the word script, okay, use the phrase an outline of what you're going to say, what you're going to touch on, and what you're going to ask for, in this case, a meeting. So in other words, maybe it's time to analyze your script. If you're leaving voicemails, for example, what are you saying on those voicemails? Please don't tell me that when you call somebody up and they don't answer, you hang up. I hope you don't do that, because what's the point in calling in the first place? And if you do call, please don't tell me that you don't have a script. Here's what I want you to start thinking about. If today you don't have voicemail scripts, then I need you to develop them. What I want you to do is develop 3, at least 3. You can go for 5 or 7, but at least 3 voicemail scripts that you're going to leave on the phone when you call and the customer doesn't answer, or the prospect doesn't answer. So for example, if I call the first time, I might want to leave an introductory voicemail. My name is Victor Antonio, da-da-da-da. Was wondering if I could get 5 minutes of your time to talk about so forth and so on. Here's why I called you, and here's why I think it would be beneficial. Boom. I write that script out. That's my first script. I'll write out a second one. That may go something like this. Hey, this is Victor Antonio. Again, calling you back. I left you a message last week where I mentioned ABC. On top of that, I also want to talk about these are the things that we believe we can help you with, blah, blah, blah. That's my second voicemail script. I'll create a third one. Now, why is it important to have these? Because look, when you pick up the phone and you get voicemail, it's really tough to wing it, to come up with something clever. Don't try to do that. Figure out what your voicemail should be saying. This is important because, again, this is part of the calling process. Let's not guess at the process. If you have 3 to 5, maybe even 7 different scripts that you can outline right away, I would write them out like an index card or have them run in front of you somewhere on an iPad or something. But I would write them out, say what I'm going to say, maybe even put a hyperlink to maybe a brochure I want them to download, or a piece of, or an article that you're sending them, or some piece of information, something. Each script should have some value to it. Listen to what I just said. This is important. Each voicemail script should have a value component with it. In other words, if I call you the first time, I might just do it as an introduction and just give you the link to my website, the company's website. The second one, what might be if I didn't get you, was I'd try to pique your interest about a certain article I found that relates to you, and then tie that back into what we can do. Third article might be something I found in their industry, maybe some growth, revenue strategies, or trends that maybe they want to know about, and I thought that would be of interest to them. And then I would say, I'd still love to talk to you directly. Get the idea? Find ways to add value components into those voicemails. So again, let's restart this. First, how many calls are you making? You got to know your numbers. How many appointments are you getting? Your call to appointment ratio. Figure that out. And if it's not high enough, then maybe something's wrong with your scripts. If they're not calling back, maybe something's wrong with your voicemail scripts. If you're getting the presentations, how often are you getting the decision makers in the room? If you're not getting the decision makers in the room, you need to change something in your approach. Maybe when you're setting up the meeting, what you need to do is to make sure to ensure that the decision makers are in the room by telling the client, the prospect, Mr. Prospect, when is the best time to get all the decision makers in the room, everybody who will influence the buying decision? That's when I'd really like to come over and visit. Or maybe I'd ask them, in your opinion, Mr. Customer, prospect, who are the people that need to be in the room? Maybe they'll mention 2 or 3. When do you think we can get those people in the room? Again, you can use this as part of your scripting. Last but not least, figure out how often are you closing. In other words, from the time I called, did the appointment, did the presentation, how many deals am I actually closing? And if I don't close because it's a big sale, how often do I advance the sale? Again, am I closing or am I advancing? What's my ratio? What's my win ratio there? And also, from the moment you made the call to the time you closed the deal or advanced it and then closed it, then look at that. That is your sales cycle. How long is your sales cycle? Knowing your sales cycle is important because your goal is always to reduce your sales cycle, because as you reduce your sales cycle, you'll now have time. First of all, you'll sell the deals faster, but you'll also have time to work on other deals. So again, in business, in sales, and even in your personal life, you gotta know your numbers. So in selling, you gotta know your numbers. That's it for this Sales Influence podcast. Don't forget to leave me some feedback on iTunes, Stitcher, or YouTube. Let me know what you think. I would greatly appreciate it. Also, check out my Seminars on Selling website. I'll be loading up some new videos, putting up one called Upselling and Cross-Selling. I think you might be interested over the next week or two. Lastly, I'd like to thank you for listening. This is Victor Antonio, always reminding you, selling ain't hard when you know how. Take care.
Every manager can feel it. The difference between a motivated, value-driven sales team and one that's stuck in a rut. CEOs know the difference too. They can see it clearly in the profit and loss columns. The question is, how do you get your team to this elite level? Is there something extra you can do to break through the remaining resistance and equip them with the right mindset to grow your business? Yes, there is. But you're not going to do it with one of those cheesy inspirational speakers or some self-proclaimed guru. What you need is someone with a real business track record to deliver key insights in a captivating way, to give your team the right tools for selling in today's tough marketplace. Enter Victor Antonio, experienced executive, innovative thinker, compelling speaker. He's ready to deliver the message you need your people to hear, not with a canned speech, but a customized, dynamic keynote designed to deliver results. Bring Victor Antonio to your next event before the competition does.